So you've spent all this time, you've spent 2.5 days already, and you've listened to philosophers, and you've listened to yogis, and you've listened to meditation masters, and you've attended ceremonies, and you've done fire circles, and you've done every kind of process imaginable, and now you're going to leave here, and now you got to live it out in the world. Good luck with that. You know, yesterday when Ron and Mary were talking, they were talking about the fact that when we fall in love, we see the soul of another person, and it's kind of a spontaneous enlightenment experience. And then Mary said, if you're lucky, this lasts for 2 weeks. I think we can maybe stretch it out a little longer than 2 weeks. However, your point, Mary, was so well taken, which is that the matching energy of all that is loving and good and true will match the energy of the person to whom you were assigned, but then those lower energies will also match. So no one should kid yourself that when you leave this place, leading with love will always be easy. Nor should you kid yourself that it should always be easy, because everything that Mary said about falling in love and meeting the matching dark side, shadow energy, and ego self of the individual is what happens in the world. And the world is not just showing us its love today. The world is showing us its shadow in a very real way. And the tribal community of spirituality and higher consciousness in America should be the last community so infantilized that we do not recognize that. Something dark and shadowy is happening in this country and on this planet. And to be honest, if you are too happy right now, what is wrong with you? Are you not looking? If you are not looking at what's happening on this planet today, if you are not looking at what's happening in this country today, and feeling somewhat depressed, something is wrong with you. There is a way in which, there is a reason why so many American women particularly are depressed today. We are depressed because we know that something is wrong. And that the last thing that should be is a scam and a multi-billion-dollar profit center for drug manufacturers. So there is a way in which the actual spiritual, this is like highfalutin, newfangled, decades-old spirituality that's very American and very capitalist. And I'd like to talk about that in relation to the real spiritual and religious traditions of the planet. Because the real serious spiritual and religious systems of the planet do not deny human suffering. Not only that, suffering is at the core teaching of it all. As a matter of fact, there is no spiritual or religious system in this world that actually gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. The reason this organization is important is because you're addressing the suffering of other sentient beings, but let us not be co-opted. Let us, our tribe, not be immature in our thinking. Let us not just address the suffering, let us address the underlying economic and social conditions that make all that suffering inevitable. And the fact that people are bound to suffer and inevitably suffering, the fact that we're going to give them some free food and some healthy food and some yoga to make them feel better only serves the master. It does not serve the slave. So let's talk about what Buddha really had to say. Let's talk about what Moses really had to say. Let's talk about what Jesus really had to say. They were here longer than we were. I was told that yesterday there was a conversation about Buddha that Deepak brought it up. So let's talk the real story of Buddha's enlightenment and how it relates to what we're talking about here this weekend. When Buddha was born, he was Prince Siddhartha, and his father was told by an astrologer that his son would grow up to be a very, very powerful person, and that he would be either a great warrior king like his father or a great holy man, one or the other. Well, Siddhartha's father was a warrior king, and the last thing he wanted was to think that his son would become a holy man. So he devised a plan. He built walls around his castle compound, and he decided for the entirety of Siddhartha's life, he would be surrounded by such beauty and such culture and such pleasure and such sexuality and everything that could possibly bring him happiness that he would never want to look across the wall. Because he knew that as long as he stayed happy inside the castle compound, he would not become a holy man. Are you with me? That he would not. But it was when one night he felt a disturbance in his heart. And Siddhartha escaped. He climbed over the walls and he saw death and suffering and age and disease for the first time. He came back to the castle compound, and it was in the middle of the night. And he saw that all of the dancers that were so beautiful during the day, and all of his teachers who were so wise during the day, and all of the women that he was with during the day, during the middle of the night when they were sleeping, he saw they were aging too, and they were suffering too, and they were diseased too. And he knew that's it. That's when he crossed over the walls permanently and began his path to enlightenment. Now, not only did Buddha not begin his path to enlightenment until he crossed over the walls and saw suffering for the first time, but I also want to remind us nice, privileged, happy Americans, neither did he just stay within the compound and throw stuff over the wall. This is very serious stuff here. Very serious stuff here. We're talking about the well-being of Aspen, okay? And it's a wonderful, beautiful, happy thing, the well-being of Aspen. And this organization is wonderful. And I would submit to you that you might consider that sentence, the well-being of one is connected to the well-being of all. Not necessarily. I think rather it would behoove us to think the well-being of all is connected to the well-being of one. Let's look at how cells in the body operate. You know, nature leads with love. When a sperm and an egg come together, and then this miraculous process begins. And all of these cell division processes begin to take place. And when a cell arises, it emerges from this invisible field of no thing, and it actualizes, and then it has, through natural intelligence, the guidance to collaborate with other cells. And as it collaborates with other cells, it then forms the brain, and it forms the pancreas, and it forms the heart, and it forms the lungs. In other words, every cell is guided by natural intelligence, not only to become what it is at its highest state of actualization, but part of its highest state of actualization and performance is to collaborate with other cells in service of the organ and the organism of which they are part. That's the natural intelligence of the universe. Not just that you become, but that you collaborate. That you become and then you collaborate, and not only that you collaborate, but that you collaborate to serve something bigger than yourself. Every once in a while, for reasons that scientists to some extent understand, and to some extent do not yet understand, a cell goes insane. A cell disconnects from its natural intelligence. It is though it forgets its highest function is to collaborate and to serve the healthy functioning of the whole. Instead, it goes off to do its own thing. It says, I don't want to just exist to collaborate with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the lungs. I don't want to just work with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the pancreas. I want to go off and do my own thing. What is that called? Cancer. That is a malignancy in the body, and it is a malignancy in consciousness, and that is the malignancy that has infected human consciousness. The malignancy that has infected human consciousness is the idea that there's no higher good than me doing my own thing. And let me tell you something, there is a higher spiritual consciousness than manifesting our own dreams. Hitler manifested his own dreams. The idea that somehow the spiritual mountaintop is figuring out what you want and manifesting your own dreams is not the spiritual mountaintop. It's magic, but there's a difference between magic and miracles. Magic is where you basically use God as your errand boy. Ooh, I've decided that through I can use metaphysical principle and I can use it to get what I want. This is not freedom, this has been co-opted to the max. Miracles is not where you use God as your errand boy and you figured out mental and metaphysical principles to get what you want. That's magic. Magic can be white, magic can be black. Magic can be of the light, magic can be of the dark. But often when magic is of the darkness, it poses as of the light. Because darkness knows as long as you're so about yourself, then everything will be okay. And only if you are only addressing the symptoms rather than the deeper causal issues of the darkness on the planet, then darkness will be okay. The highest spiritual mountaintop is a path of surrender. It is a path of the miraculous. It is a path not where we use spiritual, metaphysical principles to get what we want, but where we make ourselves available to spiritual principle to use us for what it wants. To use us for what it wants. Where we wake up in the morning and we don't figure out what we want. You know, words like intention are great, but it's been so co-opted. Hitler had an intention. There's more than you just having an intention. There is the intention, which is the mind of God, the intention, which is the mind of love. And because the mind that is not love dominates this planet, in the same way that Mary was talking about when Mary and Ron talk about it in interpersonal relationships, our tribe gets that when it comes to romance. Our tribe is very sophisticated when it comes to romance. Our tribe is very sophisticated when it comes to drug abuse, because we get the 12 steps. We need to take that same sophistication and broaden it beyond what is often our own comfort zone and see it in terms of the social and economic dynamics that are on display in our country and in the world today. Let me tell you something about a right-wing dictatorship. If a right-wing dictatorship were to take over the United States of America, I have news for you. It would leave Aspen alone. It would leave Aspen alone. You got too many billionaires here. It wouldn't mind. When you look at pictures of China, okay? Look at pictures of China. This is a dictatorship where anybody who protests is liable to be put in jail for years or even killed. But they do a lot of, what's the word I want? For not just yoga, but the Tai Chi. So that we want to remember that some of the things that we talk about being healthy living, I mean, Hitler was a vegetarian. I was reading this morning about this Hindu goddess mystic who was a vegetarian lesbian for whom Hitler was God. So we want to be very, very careful and very, very sophisticated in our tribe. Our tribe, you know, it's interesting about so many of us being women, because on one hand, we don't want to be patted on the head. And we don't want to be treated like, oh, you're just a little, don't you worry, we men, we're going to do all the thinking for you. But on another level, we have actually internalized that because it's convenient. There's an anti-intellectualism in our tribe. Our tribe, many of our people, on one hand, even about this business being happy, this is my suggestion to you. Being unhappy every once in a while isn't such a bad thing. This idea that we have taken this yellow smiley face and we've smacked it on top of everything. Like happy, I'm happy. Be happy if it's based on truth. Be happy if it's based on the fact we have problems, but we're handling them. Be happy based on the fact that, not that you're not looking, there's a difference between transformation and transcendence and denial. The fact that you're not looking doesn't mean that it's not happening. And the fact that you're not looking and saying, well, I believe in all this duality and non-duality. I know that a bunch of men came to have a platform to tell you about this. Let me give you a woman's perspective, okay? So, ultimate reality is non-dual. Ultimate reality is non-dual. But living on this planet, absolutely it's duality. But our job is not to avoid the duality. Our job is to live within the duality from a conviction that the non-dual is what we're after. But you can't bring the non-dual into the you can't bring the duality into the non-dual by denying the duality. And let's be clear here. What is the duality? It's not just a word. It's not just a concept. It is love versus that which is not love. There's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, the ego is suspicious at best and vicious at worst. Gina was telling me, one of the reasons this organization is so good and so important, Gina was saying earlier today to me, she was saying, Aspen seems so happy and well-being and stuff, but we have a high suicide rate, she said, high depression, high rates of mental disease, high rates of opioid use, and the horrible epidemic of deaths that are emerging from this. We have to look at this from a very, very serious level, which finally I do believe our society is starting to do. It's starting this week. It's starting the week before that. It's finally starting to happen. It's called the role played by big pharma and pharmaceutical companies in creating this. These people are starting to go to jail. They need to go to jail. There needs to be justice here. We have known about the terrible effects of opioid use since the ancient Greeks. And what started happening in the 1990s was that Big Pharma started selling the idea that you could create some of these opioids, but basically you could limit the level on which they were actually making people vulnerable to addiction and so forth. This is America's dirty underbelly. You know, people have told me since being here, even in Aspen, you know, I look around, I go, whoa, there's Gucci there, and there's Prada there, and Ralph Lauren, that's interesting. Well, it's interesting, it's cool, I get the extent to which it's cool. I get the extent to which it's fun. But I also get the extent to which, as an American, I am called upon to be clear about what's happening. I'm called upon as part of my responsibility of citizenship to understand what's happening here, to recognize how many people who have lived in Aspen for 25 years and 50 years, whose parents lived here, can no longer afford the rent in the very neighborhoods that they grew up enjoying. Now, this is the deal. Because when you look at Aspen, okay, you can look at Aspen, you go, well, Aspen will handle and Aspen will accommodate. I don't live in Aspen, I'm not a citizen of Aspen, so it's not really my business how Aspen handles that. What is my business as an American, and what should be all of everybody's business, is that this is a microcosm of a larger dynamic. The issue is not just that huge multinational corporations make it harder for some Aspen citizens who have been here for years. The issue is that that same dynamic is at play, making some people in the world not able to feed their families, not able to have the water that they need in order to survive, not able to grow the seeds that they have been growing for thousands of years. You know, everybody here, for instance, has heard about the Somali pirates. Well, it's true that the Somali pirates, some very dark and horrible things were happening here. But let's talk about how that began, how the whole phenomenon of the Somali pirates began. The whole Somali pirate phenomenon began because these people were fishing in these waters. This is how they fed their families. This is how had been feeding their families for centuries. And all of a sudden, these huge ships representing these huge corporate forces came in. These people couldn't, they were scaring away all the fish. These people could not fish. These people could not. And they tried talking, and of course these poor Somali people, they had no power against these huge multinational shipping companies. And so finally, in desperation, they started taking over some of the ships. And then you started the really dark phenomenon of the piracy. But it is incumbent upon us to look deeper. We are the tribe who says we don't just look at symptoms. We are the tribe that says we look at cause. We are the tribe that says we know you can't just address the level of the symptom, you have to address the level of the cause. So what happens when you really give your life to God? Do you think when you give your life to God, God says, okay, well, you can ignore all that stuff? Do you think that that's what God says to us? I don't think that that's what God says to us. That's not what God said to Buddha. Siddhartha had a disturbance in his heart, and he had to climb over those walls. And then let's talk about the next great deliverer. Let's talk about Moses. Moses had escaped. Moses, his mother, had hid him so that no one would know he was a Jewish baby. And he was in fact brought up by an Egyptian princess, the daughter of the Pharaoh, who didn't know he was a Jewish baby. And so he escaped. All the other Jews were slaves. All the other Israelites were slaves under Pharaoh. But Moses was like, hey, I got lucky. I got lucky. Ladies and gentlemen, we all got lucky. So Moses knew that he had gotten lucky, but Moses went out one day, and he was working in the fields, and he saw a slave driver beating a Jew. And even though he had escaped, something in his heart knew, I can't look away. And he actually struck the slave driver, and he killed him. He killed him. And then he went, whoa, I got to get out of town. So he left Egypt, and he is going about his business. He married, he became a shepherd, and one day, he saw a burning bush. Now, the burning bush is a fascinating concept because the burning bush in the Bible did not burn the way a bush would burn. A bush, if you saw a bush out there, it would stop. Either someone would put the fire out, or even if no one put the fire out, if no other bushes were around it, the burning would stop. But on the burning bush, it did not stop burning. That's what we see when we meditate. That's what we see when we pray. That's what we see when we really get deep to spirituality, that we enter the stream of the burning bush and a voice comes from inside the burning bush. And does the voice say, yippee, we got out of there? does the voice say, send the Jews their slaves, but send them some clothing? Do what you can. It said, go back and tell Pharaoh to release my people. That's what he had to do. Now, this is a long story, we could spend a day on that, and it would be a good, actually, seminar. However, the Jews are led out of Egypt, but not too long after they are led out of Egypt, and they've crossed the Red Sea and so forth, Moses is called by God. Moses is called by God. Not only did God look at Moses' heart and say, I want you to go back and save your people. God said to Buddha, the Spirit said to Buddha, go address suffering. And God said to Moses, go and rescue your people. And when it said, after he said, go and rescue your people, then when God called Moses later up to Mount Sinai to give him the 10 Commandments, what was that about? It was God telling the Israelites how I want you to live. So spirituality is not just about what God will do for us. Spirituality is about what God expects of us. And what God said to the Israelites through Moses on the Mount Sinai when he came down was, this is what God said to the Israelites metaphorically meaning the children of God, which means all of us. I want you to be a nation of priests. That is what you are called to do when you leave this place. If you're an artist, be a priest as an artist. If you are a scientist, be a priest as a scientist. If you are an educator, be a priest as an educator. If you are a teacher, whatever you do, to be the priestly function. And what is the priestly function? The priestly function is that you make yourself available to that which comes from beyond you, that then is extended through you to be of service to other people. But once again, Moses didn't not notice the suffering of the people, and Buddha did not notice the suffering of the people, and the suffering of Jesus on the cross is central to the myth. You can't skip the crucifixion and go right to the resurrection. We are living in very sobering times. Like I said, if you're totally happy today, I think you're not looking. We here in our own country are experiencing, as we speak, a full-scale assault on American democracy. We are in the middle of a full-scale assault on American democracy. And it's not just progressives who are saying this. Brave and wise conservatives are saying it as well. This is not something for us to somehow build a little circle around that or build a circle around ourselves to be in a bubble so that we ourselves are not facing it. James Baldwin, there's a great line from James Baldwin, which is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that is not faced. The higher consciousness community should be the last group that is not facing what's going down in this country. We have allowed ourselves to be infantilized over the last few decades. Not, as I said, we were talking with, not when it comes to romance, not when it comes to drugs, but for whatever reason, we've kept ourselves on the periphery about everything else. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. We should be the biggest grown-ups in this room. And so people say, well, where does love come in? Where does love come in? Every time somebody says, where does love come in, they're just talking about love for Donald Trump. We love Donald Trump on an impersonal level, but as Martin Luther King said, I have to love those people. I do not have to like them. And just as in romance, the fact that I love you, that we have a deep, intimate relationship doesn't mean we don't have a good fight every once in a while. We just learn how to fight with honor. In a free society, we don't all have to agree with each other. And so at this point, yeah, you're called upon to love democracy, to love America, to love what we have been given and what it is our responsibility to bequeath to our children. If we do not do that, then like I said, we are not free. We are under the behest of license, but that is not freedom. And as women particularly, if what you are doing is getting applause all the time, you're probably not yet doing the right stuff. Because a woman, one of the reasons, when you think about a lot of the women that are allowed to be very empowered in America today, they tend to be women who are not writing their own lines. They're actresses or in certain kinds of news organizations and stuff where they are themselves not writing the script. when women are really writing the script, women bleed every month. Men bleed in battle. Men bleed when something has gone wrong. Women bleed when something is going right. It is part of the birth process. We are close to blood. We are close to what's happening. We are close to what's happening to children. And in every advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives, there is a common anthropological characteristic, and that is the fierce behavior of the adult female when she senses that there is a threat to her cubs. The bears, hello, here. I'm sure in Colorado everybody knows that. They'll leave you alone, just don't get close to their babies. They'll come after you. That is called nature loving, because you don't mess with a mama bear or a tiger or tigress, and when the mother bear or tiger or lioness comes at you fiercely because you are messing with her cubs, we don't say about her that she has anger issues, and she's strident, and she really has clearly some issues of her own she has to work out. Because really, she should take something or meditate more so that when they come after her babies, she should be cool with that. No. What is happening to the children on this planet is the display of a species without showing a real intent to survive. The word unsustainable is not ugly enough. It's got soft letters in it, but it means we die. Why is it that our tribe gets that about a drug addict, but won't get that about the species? Why is it that our tribe gets that you mount an intervention when that person needs to know, we can't just watch you continue doing this? We can't watch you, we're very sophisticated about that. We'll say to each other, should we have an intervention because this person needs to go to rehab, they're going to die if we don't do something. Why is it that we're so relatively, we let ourselves go there about the environment too. But in too many other areas, we think we can keep it within our own private issues. Let me tell you something, if it's a public issue, it will get to your private door. I don't care how much green juice you drink. I don't care how gluten-free you are. If they are poisoning the air and poisoning the earth and poisoning the water and completely dismantling the EPA, you and your kids will suffer too. And so, there's an awakening. But there's an awakening. The Course in Miracles talks about how the world in which we live it's an illusion, but that's not an illusion we're supposed to ignore. It is an illusion we're supposed to transform. It is a dream that has become a nightmare. But the Course in Miracles, for too many people, but the Course in Miracles does not say that you go from a nightmare to a state of awakening. We have to go from the nightmare, the bad dream, to a happy dream. And then we can awaken. But the happy dream does not come about because we are ignoring any of the darkness, nor is it coming about because we are only addressing the symptoms of the darkness. There's a wonderful book called The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. She's the one who wrote the book about bees. Yeah, but Invention of Wings is so amazing. And it's about these two women who are actual historical characters called the Grimke sisters. And the Grimke sisters were born into a slave-owning family in South Carolina, and they became two leading abolitionists and then two leading feminists. Their story is amazing. Now, and the reason they went from being, children of a slave-owning family and so forth, was that they were converted into the abolitionist movement by the Quakers. And that's another story, too, that I want to talk to you about. But what that book did for me was it made me think about the difference between being anti-slavery and being an abolitionist. Now, if you were anti-slavery, you would say, I think slavery is terrible. I think it's terrible. I would not live in a slave-owning state, and I think those people are terrible. I'm totally anti-slavery. That did not change the life of one slave. What is the psychological, emotional, and spiritual transition from anti-slavery to abolitionist? The anti-slavery just meant, I want nothing to do with that. I would never do that. Not enough. The abolitionist was someone on my watch. As long as I have anything to say about it, and I do have something to say about it, this will stop. It's not an accident that the abolitionist movement arose from the Quakers. It's not an accident that so much of American democracy, the very idea, arose from the Quakers. It is not an accident that the leader of the civil rights movement was a Baptist preacher. It is not an accident that so many of the women who were head of the women's suffragette movement were themselves Quakers. Why is that? The greatest social justice movements in the United States have emerged from the religious and spiritual communities, because the Quaker believes in that invisible light, that glorious light within every man, woman, and child. And because of that light, that is our equality. That is where you get the idea that God created all men equal. And so the idea that that light is within every man, woman, and child meant that to the Quaker, slavery was intolerable. It's not that it's bad, it's intolerable. You know, I can't imagine a kind of, sort of, sometimes casually, you know, when it's committed terrorist. These people are very, very serious. They are convicted. Every time there's a terrorist act, the president, whoever the president is, has said that these cowards, this cowardly act would not be punished. And I always tilt my head, because I tell you, when you talk about a terrorist and a suicide bombing and the horrible things these people do, I can go along with unconscionable, I can go along with evil. What I can't go along with is cowardly. The truth of the matter is, hatred has a perverse kind of courage. On the other hand, I know a lot of us, and I count myself one, who at times are sort of, you know, casually kind of, sort of, you know, when it's convenient, committed to love. The problem in this planet, the problem in this country, is not that more people hate than love, but that people who hate to hate, hate today, hate with conviction. They are serious. They are not kidding. They have shown in horrifying ways they will do anything to effectuate their worldview. But when it comes to love, and the Course in Miracles says miracles arise from conviction, we are too often loving where love is convenient. Love that is convenient is not the love that will save the world. Love that is just within our bubble is not the love that will save the world. Love that is just for ourselves and our own children is not the love that will save the world. You know, when I was growing up, my mother was a very traditional housewife. And I looked at her life, and I thought that her life was not meaningful enough. She cared about my father, she cared about her children, she cared about her home, and that was her life. And she cared about her broader community, don't get me wrong, she was very much involved in the broader community. But she found her meaning in taking care of my father and taking care of her children, taking care of her home. And I was raised at a time with the burgeoning feminism of the 70s. No, I want to go out there and do something meaningful. Well, first of all, you become metaphysically astute enough, you realize there is no out there. Because time and space, what is out there? That's number one. But more than that, one day I was at a goddess thing, and I had a lot of cut velvet, and I was dancing under the moon, and I was thinking about the goddess, and I was thinking, my mother is closer to the goddess than what we're doing here with our dancing. Because the goddesses take care of the earth and take care of the beings who are the children of the earth. My mother was right. Take care of the children and take care of your home. It's just that our generation has evolved to realizing that has got to mean every child, and that the earth itself is our home. And the goddess is not just dressed up in cut velvet at fire ceremonies. She is fierce, and so should we be. So, when you leave this place, if you truly surrender yourself, you know, if you just go out to leave this place, figure out what you want, and all that, and your intention and all that, if you just do that, then you will have one life, and God bless you, and enjoy yourself. But please don't call that the spiritual mountaintop, because it's not. And there's not one serious spiritual or religious tradition on the planet that would agree that it is. But if you leave this place, and you say to the God of your understanding, use me, then it will not always be easy. People will not always applaud you. People will not always even necessarily like you. And you will be finding yourself confronting things that are very painful to see. It will be painful to see that they are dismantling the EPA. It will be painful to see that Dow Chemical could give the Trump campaign $1 million so that it could continue to sell a pesticide that we know is harming children's brains. It will be painful to you to see that Scott Pruitt, the head of the EPA, has actually passed that and sees the ability of Dow Chemical to make its millions as equal as a moral equivalent to whether or not our children's brains are harmed. No, that will not be a happy day. It will not be a happy hour for you to read about that. It will not be happy for you to see that our own government is working hard at voter suppression. If you are really looking, it will not be happy for you to see what mass incarceration is doing to part of the population of the United States. If you are really looking, it will not always make you happy. But the spiritual life is not a happiness that is based on denying what is going on. The happiness of the spiritual life is happiness because you know that on the other side of that, there's another possibility. That you proclaim the resurrection, not having denied the crucifixion, but simply because you know that the crucifixion is not the end of the story. And it's going to take 3 tough days. Or it's going to take those 40 tough years in the desert. But you know what? We can do this. That is why so many of the spiritual source points and foundations of the great social justice movements, not only did it give people, the abolitionists and the women suffragettes and the civil rights workers, not only did it give them the capacity to say, no, this will not happen, this has got to stop, no, but it also gave them the spiritual authority to know that they could invoke on the other side of it what was possible. The story of the United States, the story of America is one of the greatest stories in the history of the world. We were born of a great dichotomy. We were born on one hand with foundational principles in our own Constitution and Declaration of Independence that are the most enlightened principles that have ever been imbued into the founding of any country in the world. On the other hand, we had slavery, genocide of the Native American people, and so forth. So in our DNA from the very beginning, there has been this dichotomy. Some people act like this, they just discovered this. Like, hello, no, this is not news. But the story of the United States is that even though in every generation there have been those who did stand for the forces of oppression, for the forces of lovelessness, who did wish to, just as there are now, withdraw the material resources of the country from the goal of the full embodiment of our own enlightened principles, there have been those who pushed them back. It is important, we know that in our community, you've got to identify your darkness, but you also got to identify your light because you need your light to cast out the darkness. Yeah, we got some stuff that we're not perfect, but we also have the glory of God within us, and let's not forget that either. So in the United States, it's important that we identify slavery, but it's important we identify with the abolitionists. Yeah, it's important that we identify that women couldn't even vote, but it's important that we identify with the women suffragettes. Yes, it's important that we identify that there was segregation and legalized white supremacy in the American South, but it's important that we identify with the civil rights workers. It's important that we realize this is not the first generation that has had forces that have harnessed political power to push against the very enlightenment that we believe not only is the meaning of America, but for those of us in the spiritual community, the meaning of the self-actualization, which is the destiny of the human race. But let us not be the first generation that wimped out on the job of pushing back against that. That's the issue. And I have to tell you something. Just in case you're wondering, we really don't have time for you to get done with your trauma work before you join us. And we really don't have time for you to get over, it's so toxic. Of course it's toxic because we're not there. That's why politics is toxic. Every single area that our crowd has touched has been transformed. Where do you think all that mindfulness stuff comes from? Us. Where do you think all those yoga mats come from? Us. Where do you think all that sanctuary stuff and whole person education, whole person medicine, where do you think that stuff comes from? Us. Politics doesn't have it. It's old-fashioned. It's based in mid-century mentality. Too many of us say, I don't want to go there because it's toxic. It's only toxic because we haven't gone there. So the issue is, for us to know, do you think that the people who crossed that bridge at Selma were not traumatized? Do you think that the abolitionists were not scared? Do you think it was that these people were not as stressed and anxious as any of us are? I'm sure even more so. There is a way in which our community, to be honest, needs to toughen up. We need to read some books. We need to get smart. We are smart, but we need to stop coddling our neuroses. We need to stop coddling the neuroses in each other. On certain days, we will cry. You bet we will cry. But you know what? Let me tell you what happens when you're depressed and also having to change the world. You cry, and then you get up, and you take a shower, and you change the world. And I know from my own experience, your subconscious will put your own tears on the shelf for a few hours. You go do what you need to do to save this country and to save this world. You come back, you'll cry some more, but you will sleep better that night because you knew what you did, what needed to be done. You prayed that day, you meditated that day, and then you kicked ass. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.